in thinking about how to continue the conversation about Mel, I was thinking about what was so powerful about Mel's imagery. And I was actually struck by something that Don Futterman, who's on the call, said at his graveside service a year and a half ago, as we were all commenting on how Mel wanted like a big thing. Mel needed a New Orleans band, and he needed preachers and teachers and songs. And there it was in the middle of COVID. There were just 10 or 15 of us. And that's something very interesting. He said Mel wasn't like our dads, and he wasn't like our teachers, and he wasn't like the Jewish educators we knew. He was rougher, he was tougher, he cursed, he gave off this kind of macho image, which, and we'll get into the problematics of it too, if we wish. So I started to think about it. I started to think about something that I frankly have taught with younger people. This whole question of, is George Costanza Jewish? And there's a subtitle, which is, what's with that whole forearm shtick? What was that all about? As an educational technique, as part of the Mel persona, and frankly, I'm going to argue, as a Zionist statement. And some people said, "What are you, crazy?" It's obvious George Costanza is Italian, but in fact, there's a Quora debate, so that means it's valid, because if it's on the internet, it must be true, whether George Costanza is Jewish. And if you scroll down, someone else gives a very halachic answer, which is that while Jerry Stiller, who was born Jewish, plays a more Italian type on Seinfeld, in fact, Estelle Parsons, the wife, is Jewish, so it makes him halachically Jewish. But it's more than that. It's George Costanza's persona. And we well know, when we were watching Seinfeld, we had less of a sense of the whole Larry David thing that was going on, but we're well aware of how strong a Jewish sensibility is. It also may be a little bit of a touchy subject for me, because I'm not sure if this was a microaggression, a macroaggression, or a compliment, but 50 pounds ago and 15 years ago when I was teaching at McGill, one of the students in assessing me said, he reminds me of George Costanza. And to this day, I'm not sure if that was a compliment or a criticism. But let's go now. We're actually going to stop sharing, and I'm going to go to Mirav, who's going to help us with the audio. We're going to look at two clips. We're going to look at a clip. Now, again, this is a Seinfeld moment. Some of you may be familiar with it. And I think, regardless of his lineage, there's something deeply Jewish in this little clip, and something that makes us sensitive to what Mel, I think, was very consciously trying to fight against, maybe with a blunt instrument.
Bozo?
No.
B-O-Z-O.
Sorry.
You've never heard of Bozo the Clown?
No.
How could you not know who Bozo the Clown is?
I don't know, I just don't.
How can you call yourself a clown and not know who Bozo is?
Hey, man, what are you hassling me for? This is just a gig. It's not my life. I don't know who Bozo is. What, is he a clown?
What, is he a clown? What, are you kidding me?
Well, what is he?
Yes, he's a clown!
All right, so what's the big deal? There's millions of clowns.
All right, just forget it.
Forget me? You should forget it. You're living in the past, man. You hung up on some clown from the 60s, man.
All right. Very good, very good. All right, go fold your little balloon animals, Eric. Eric. What kind of name is that for a clown, huh?
Excuse me. You must be George. I'm Robin's mother. Oh, you seem like such a lovely young man.
Well, I do what I can.
Hi, Ma. How's everything?
Oh, this is just a wonderful party.
Burgers should be ready in a minute.
Oh, great, great.
Oh,
What's that smell? Smoke? Smoke? Everybody, I think I smell some smoke back here. Fire! It was an inferno in there! An inferno!
Wait, no, continue. Mirav, continue.
was trying to lead the way. We needed a leader, someone to lead the way to safety.
But you yelled, "Get out of my way!"
Because, as the leader, if I die, then all hope is lost. Who would lead? The clowns? Instead of castigating me, you should all be thanking me. What kind of a topsy-turvy world do we live in where heroes are cast as villains, brave men as cowards?
But I saw you push the women and children out of the way in a mad panic. I saw you knock them down. And when you ran out, you left everyone behind.
Seemingly. To the untrained eye, I can fully understand how you got that impression. What looked like pushing, what looked like knocking down, was a safety precaution. In a fire, you stay close to the ground, am I right? And when I ran out that door, I was not leaving anyone behind. Oh, quite the contrary. I risked my life making sure that exit was clear. Any other questions?
How do you live with yourself?
It's not easy.
So the question is, before we go to another clip, the question is, even if George Costanza isn't Jewish, is this a Jewish moment? Is this a what's the sensibility that I'm, in a somewhat controversial way, I admit, trying to address here? Anybody want to? Let me see if I can. Any thoughts? Right, if this was done by an anti-Semite, it would be somewhat problematic potentially. But this is done by Jews about Jews. What's the messaging? What's the imagery?
I'll flip it and to do the mirror. Meaning, if it was a drama, for example, you would have this very handsome, kind of Harrison Ford, Brad Pitt-esque character, saving everyone, charging out the door, putting out the fire, and then receiving accolades downstairs as he's helping treat other people. So Costanza is the total opposite.
Right, he's a coward, right? And then not only is he a coward, what else does he do? He lawyers, right? He does Talmudic pilpul in a sense to justify himself. And to me, it just sort of it exudes a kind of self-loathing that we can see in a certain conversation about American Jewry. It made me think of the short story I remember reading at camp that I didn't understand at all when I was 14 by Philip Roth, Eli the Fanatic. But the contrast between the kind of Zionist we were trying to be, the kind of Jew we were trying to be, the new Jew, muscular Judentum, and the kind of Jew Mel was trying to model. And again, the modeling we got elsewhere at home in the Jewish establishment, in many ways, the Jewish media, was to me quite striking. And to even make it more excruciating, we're going to look at another clip, again, emphasizing this is not a clip from some Zionists, this is a clip from deep within the heart of Jewish Hollywood. This is Adam Sandler, just giving you a minute and a half of Don't Mess with the Zohan. Meirav.
What the hell was this, champ? I'm not paying for that! This asshole cut me off, made me swerve into you.
Sir, with all due respect, I was in the bicycle lane, and you came around like a madman. Let's just be glad nobody was hurt. I mean, somebody could have died. I mean, you came too stupid. Okay, real mature, sir. Real mature.
You do not want to be throwing bicycles.
Look, stay out of my business, Mustafa.
Mustafa, this is not my name. Who tells you this is my name?
Whatever. Salami, bologna, applesauce.
Apple who? My friend, if I were you, I would change the tone. Avoid the pain.
Listen, go back to your goddamn pretzel stand. We got it.
Look what I've got.
Please.
It's right here. I've got it.
Please, let me
never
go.
work a pretzel stand. You like to insult people?
Was that your feet?
Yes, it's the feet. The feet uppercut.
Okay.
Here comes the double foot. This is good. Smell it, smell it, smell it. Now take it. That's for you.
Let me go.
You said you wanted pretzel?
Okay, I'm good.
Beautiful, Yofi.
You want some chickens?
No. I fix for you. It's all beseder.
What are you, bionic?
No. I only like the girls. Thanks anyways.
Thank you. Of course, these days we have to give trigger warnings about the humor, but what's going on here? It's here Adam Sandler, if it takes it and raises it up a notch. What are we seeing here?
I'll jump in because this is my favorite movie in the world. So I'm outing myself. Can you guys hear?
Yep, we can hear.
So I may be taking it in a direction you hadn't anticipated, but since we know the backstory of this movie, at least I think a lot of us do, this is the Israeli hero coming in and fixing the New York streets. And this is how Zionism works in Adam Sandler form, with force, but effective force, and with but force to do good, to set the world aright again. So I'm taking it in that sort of, Zohan isn't a Zionist movie necessarily, but I think from this scene that's what I would take.
Right, the ending has its complexities, right? But at that moment,
Right.
the character of the Zohan, right? And it's almost in 90 seconds we have four, what we call in Hebrew tipusim, four types, right? Who are the four types? We have once again a George Costanza type Jew trying to lawyer his way out of the situation, right? The little nerdy kid on the bicycle. We have the guys I grew up with around in Queens, you know, those milkmen, those delivery guys, the Italians, the Irish. We have the waspy Ubermensches, who in our New York world seem to stride across the stage heroically like Superman. But then, we have indeed, Deb, the Zionist superhero, the Israeli superstar, the Tzabar. So I thought this was particularly interesting because we live in a world where masculinity has a first name, toxic. Macho has a second name, bullshit. And we know, we love Mel, we revere Mel's memory, but we know that there were complexities around this intense machismo, but without justifying it. And I'm very happy to hear people's response in a few minutes. Let's go deeper into the Zionist ideology behind it and what was really going on. By the way, you'll see when I teach this, I have to actually show Bozo and explain a few minutes about who Bozo was, because it's a different generation. And the text that I actually do remember learning and understanding in MA is Max Nordau's Muscular Judentum, talking about the Jewry of muscle. And I think to understand what even we were experiencing in 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s with Mel, you have to go back to even before the Shoah, to the turn of the century, and to the shadow of anti-Semitism. And Nordau, speaking to the Zionist Congress, talks about how we've been engaged in the mortification of our flesh. Others actually did the killing of our flesh for us, right? And we would prefer to develop our bodies, but all we did was suffer, suffer, suffer. Our poor limbs in these narrow Jewish streets forgot their gay movements. In the dimness of sunless houses, our eyes began to blink shyly. We were cut off from history. We were cut off from nature. We were cut off from our bodies. We were cut off from ourselves. And so, for no other people will gymnastics fulfill a more educational purpose that'll straighten us up in body and in character. It'll give us self-confidence. Now, some will say we have too much self-confidence as it is, but we completely lack any confidence in our physical prowess. And our new muscle Jews, our muscular Juden, haven't yet regained the heroism of our forefathers, who in large numbers eagerly entered the sports arena. to take competition, to pit themselves against the highly trained Hellenists, right? So here we also see what we're playing out in America. And of course, those of us in the 1970s were worshiping at the shrine, I'm sorry to say, of Woody Allen, right? And there we come as these Woody Allen Jews. There we come as these Jews who were so used to sort of playing the George Costanza Pilpul game. I remember when I was threatened by the Falcon Boys in the Z House in 1977, and the way I got out of it, it's a much longer story, but I was literally at the second story window, and there are 20 Italian toughies in their leather jackets threatening us because they had one of them, a kid like a 15-year-old, had tried to pull the pocketbook from Risa Kent, and I had to run down to protect Risa Kent stupidly. And this 15-year-old had come to the side and cold cocked me, and then Don Levy had come charging down, yelling, "Stop!" And we're playing it out. The next thing we know, we have 20 Falcon Boys, all with rocks and with chains, threatening to attack us. And I get up and I start explaining. I'm actually living out this Woody Allen / George Costanza thing, how he came to from my right, and I'm a lefty, and I wouldn't have hit him, blah, 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 blah. And they go, okay. Like they literally threw up their hands and said, if it ever happens again, we'll knock all the windows out of this place. It also helped that they knew Don Levy from Hillcrest High School. But we came to camp, and we came to Mel World. And many of us went on to become intellectuals, and many of us went on to use our minds. And Mel took such pride in that, and had such great appreciation for it. But there was also always this strange dynamic of the body and the mind and the soul. And he, of course, loved to play that he was much more of an instinctive educator than he was. He actually spent a lot more time with the books. He spent a lot more time preparing than he let on. But we also know that it played out befall, as we say in camp sometimes, in a more sexist way. But there was also this weird messaging that was going on. If you look, by the way, and this comes from the Wikipedia page, there were women's sports clubs and women's gymnastics clubs that also emerged as a result of this Zionist idea. And one of the things we also learned in MA, back when it was Machaneh Avodah, and we learned through the Zionist ideas, we also read those books about the Chalutzot and about the pioneering women. So it was definitely complex, and there sometimes was lots of baggage, but I actually think Mel was very, very conscious about trying to create a new Jew. And before I open up for some questions, comments, and reactions, and feel free to disagree, feel free to go into some of the problematics. One of the things that's so fascinating about the Zionist movement, and you hear this from David Ben-Gurion from the left and Zev Jabotinsky from the right, is they both say in different ways at different times that most national movements had a hard enough time creating a revolution of the people, changing the regime. The American Revolution had to get rid of the British, the French Revolution had to get rid of the king, the Russian Revolution had to get rid of the Tsar, the Chinese Revolution had to get rid of the capitalists. But the Zionist Revolution had a double obstacle. Not only did we have to get rid of first the Turks and then the British, but we also had to do a psychological process and get rid of the Jew within. And when I think of so much of Mel's shticks, both the good and the sometimes toxic, when I think of so much what Mel was doing and part of his appeal, both to men and to women, I'm struck by how conscious he was of modeling that. And his kind of Zionist recreation story, or a Zionist, we might call it today, coming out story, is of wandering around Madison Square Garden, wandering around outside Madison Square Garden, and hearing a rally about Jewish pride and Jewish power. And he says, in the wake of the Shoah, in the wake of the Holocaust, in the wake of what we as a people had endured, I, this tough kid from the Bronx, am embarrassed by my people. And then I meet these Zionists who tell me that as Zionists, you can be proud of yourself, and you can return to the body, you can return to the land, and you can return to history. And so, while acknowledging the ups and downs, I bless Mel for all that he taught us. And I want to just finish before I open for some questions with what Sharon shared with me, and this came from a file of more fucking forearms, and it's Mel, and Mel, and so we and it was also interesting how we recreated him, we mimicked him, we echoed him, but we also deviated from his path. And I always say that much as I loved Mel, I also was very happy to be in Bet, because Bet had a little less of some of those dynamics. And I toast him, I toast you, and I open it now for some questions, comments, and reactions. Thank you. Brenda.
Hi. So I'm listening to this and I'm thinking to myself, well, this quest, I grew up in New Jersey. I was in Livingston Club, going to a Solomon Schechter day school where the teachers were one way, except for the Israelis, who were all kind of a little harder. And then along comes Mel and Livingston Club. But I think it's the same kind of appeal that, in a way, Kahana and the JDL had. But lahavdil elev havdelot, like, you know, Mel was teaching us values. He was teaching us to fight for Russian Jewry. He was teaching us to be good people. And obviously, I have a fight to pick with JDL and what it represented and what Kahana represented. But I think that the image, the tough guy image, there's a lot of similarity there in terms of what appealed to young Jews in the 60s and 70s as an alternative to the Woody Allen image.
Right, but you're absolutely right. He had that tough Jew side, but he also very much had that strong sense of values, right? And it was very important from the, those stories that he told about fighting rabbis because they weren't willing to go to the March on Washington, fighting the Jewish establishment and Israeli consul generals because he was going to embrace the fight with for Ethiopian Jewry. And then years later, in his critique of Israeli politics. So he had that tough side, but he also was able to show that you could be a tough liberal. And I think he was very conscious of the fact that he wasn't going down the path of the Kahanists.
Which was beautiful and rare at the time.
Yeah.
And I think that arm wrestling was also really crucial because so few of us were physically strong, so of the guys. So even though he was an alternative model for us too, and he could almost beat anybody. The only guy I remember beating him was Israeli, so it takes us right back to the Zoan. But the other side of the other piece of it, and it was certainly a boys' club, and it was certainly in some ways very difficult to be a woman, especially to be a Merakezets in Mel's world. That was the very few people survived that gauntlet, so that was not so great, obviously. But I think the other side of the puzzle was Yafa, because the myth that we learned was that she was the brave Palmach fighter. She was the warrior, not Mel. Mel was just this strong guy, who went over to Israel and had to come back to the Galut, and I heard all different, a few different stories why that happened, but that was, so that was another part of the puzzle in the way that we looked at it all, because it connected us to the founding of the state and our central myth.
And for all his potty mouth, he was incredibly devoted to Yafa, right? And there were interesting power dynamics, right? And he was, he all of us who worship at the shrine of Mel talk about how difficult it would have been for Mel to function in today's world, and how many lines that we respect that are important he crossed again and again. But the one big red line he never crossed was he never disrespected his wife. And he actually showed us during an age, let's talk about in the 70s and the 80s, when divorce is starting to spread, he showed us a model of a lifetime of marriage, of a lifetime of devotion. So yes, he had his little secret pocket where he puts his hidden money so he could buy some unkosher food here and there. But on the whole, it was, even that ended up being an act of homage to Yafa, and she was always front and center. And I have to say, I learned a lot about marriage from his both from his example and from the riffs that he gave. Others?
I had a thought. Hey, Gil. Hi, everybody. So nice to see so many people I know. So we're talking about Mel from the 70s, early 80s. But the person I'm thinking about now that's representing Jewish might is very, very today, which is Zelensky. And here we have, you know, this man out in the streets in his army t-shirt and army, you know, sweater, and he is fighting and he's calling, you know, on Israel, he's calling, you know, on Congress, everybody to stand up. And every news article, almost, well, many, point out that he's a Jew, especially when Putin said the Nazification of Ukraine. And I can't help but just, I mean, of course, we admire this man, but I'm curious your thoughts about that persona representing, you know, the Jewish fighter in this day and age.
Well, it's very
Can
interesting.
I throw some? Could I
Sure.
throw something in there?
Yeah.
Laura, I love that point. I just wanted to insert to sort of further Laura's question. I was studying yesterday with my chavruta, some Purim prep. And we talked exactly about Laura's point, but whether or not he might be a kind of Mordechai. As a Galut Jew, I'd love to hear what Gil says about this, but as a Galut Jew who rises through it's clear to all of us, right, through the political ranks in a foreign country and things get topsy-turvy, right? So I just wanted to throw that into the pot.
I love that. First of all, I'll see you and raise you, right? Because I'm sure many of you have seen that video of him dancing with the stars, right? And he's in one, not just ridiculous costume, you can see it afterwards on YouTube, but quite feminine costume after another, right? And he's quite a good dancer, but he's in these, you know, very ridiculous, overdone Ukrainian dance competition costumes. So he actually does go through this transformation, right? It's very much he's living through that thing. But what's interesting is that I would argue that history and Zionist history in Israel has prepared the ground for the public to accept a tough Jew and a fighting Jew in a way that it wasn't. I want to throw out one more dimension, if I can, which is the class dimension. Because there's another way that Mel played. Mel used to love to tell the story of his Oneg Shabbat group and his friends in New Jersey. And most of them were gazillionaires. They were the gazillionaires or intellectuals, right? He always talked, he would talk about, you know, Adi Fryerman and Norman Cohn and David Ruderman, right? And he made them, even if we never heard of them, he made them famous because he kept on repeating them as, right? And what were they? They were authors, or many of them did extremely well financially. And he came in, and what did he have over them? Or what was his way of playing that class game? He had the two things we've mentioned, the macho side and also the value side. That he was the one educating the kids, that he was the one sacrificing, that he was the one living a life of values and living his ideals and not just talking about them. And it gave him a status because they revered him, right? And so and also allowed him to take the freebies, to take the box seats in the Yankee games and take the nice restaurants that he loved in New York. And not do it in a way that made it seem like, I can see Steve smiling because he also knew how to work it. But not do it in a way that was demeaning to him, but was doing that there was kind of like a power balance, a power exchange. And that also just shows that his instinctive sense of how to play both the American game and the Zionist game. We have time, I think, for one or two more questions, comments, and I'll sum up. Any thoughts? Pushback. So in essence, what I was trying to raise today was two things. One, we go back to the question of, you know, is George Costanza Jewish? And I'm quite convinced that he is a Jewish type, and that there is a strength when we look at American Jewish comedy and we look at the American Jewish, and I wouldn't have done this with Israeli perceptions, right? Because that would be way too triggering. It was important that it come from within the heart of the American Jewish community. And there is a weird disconnect with the body and a weird self-loathing about the body and a weird way of building up the Israeli that we saw in those clips. And Mel was very much balancing that out. And if we think about power, right? Because ultimately much of the Zionist conversation these days and back then was about power, we see two anomalies. We see within American Jewry, the anomaly that in general, there's a lot of talk about Jewish power in terms of your Zuckerbergs and your Ginsburgs and those people who succeed. But when we talk about the Jewish community as a whole, especially these days with the rise of anti-Semitism, there tends to be an emphasis on Jewish weakness, And in Israel, when we look and we see the conversation about power, there on the one hand is a comfort with power, but there's also a deep discomfort with power because of the moral implications of using power and abusing power. And if we had more time, I could go through each one of those 4 categories and see how Mel had a certain Torah on each one of them. But hopefully the takeaway is for us to understand, even if we have criticisms of what Mel looked like in the 1970s, or what Mel felt like to us in the 1980s and 90s, and certainly what Mel would have felt like in 2020, 2021, 2022, to remember that I think every day he was consciously fighting 2,000 years of Jewish suffering, and every day he was fighting that shadow of the Holocaust, and every day he was very consciously trying to say to us as American Jews, both men and women, there's a different way than some of the messaging that you're getting at home, at school, in the Jewish establishment and Jewish institutions. And I hope we can continue criticizing that where he failed, but also very much remembering and honoring that where he succeeded. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gil.
Thank you so much, Gil. We do have just a couple more minutes if anyone had any other questions. We got a little bit of an extension since we started the main room a little bit late, and I will be posting in the chat the Google Doc link to see the available next sessions if anyone wants to get a head start and see what they want to join next.
Hey, Gil, it's Iyyun. I wanted to say one thing to extend beyond what you said, in that we now have, from the powerful state of Israel, we have the very Jewish leader, Naftali Bennett, mediating between Ukraine and Russia. And so there's a combination of values and strength. And I would dare say that it is largely because of the strength of Israel and the values, not just one of those, that Israel has been asked by both the Russians and the Ukrainians and the US to mediate.
Look, that's a great point. There's a very rich Zionist conversation both before the state and after the state about how bad we are at diplomacy, and how that muscle also has withered. And we saw that, Israelis early on showed much greater skill at brute force and at soldiering than at statesmanship. But perhaps now Naftali Bennett could be a new image and represent Zionism 3.0, where we find that balance that we were hoping to achieve way back when, between the values that we live in our sources, the way, and you even see it in the Muscular Judentum text, how sometimes it was very easy to be moral when we didn't have power, but now perhaps we can show that we can, with one hand have power, but with another hand, and with our traditional smarts, have diplomacy and have a way forward which is different. No Israeli prime minister gets votes for being diplomatic, and it'll be interesting to see. One of the things I was curious about was how Bennett, who has not done very well with the Israeli public, and who 8 months into what some of us think is actually quite a remarkable experiment in centrist coalition building and juggling, he has not moved the needle politically, popularly. He's polling with the same numbers that he had pretty much on election day, and it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. But obviously, it also depends on what history shows about this mediation effort.